This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
It's episode 78 of Play-by-Playcast. Thanks as always for clicking subscribe and or download. Joining us once again here on a Friday morning, my name is Joel Godet, the television and radio broadcaster of the Ball State University Cardinals, and this is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. As always, you can find us on social media. The podcast is at PXPcast, and I am at Joel Godet, JoelGodett, or if email's more your thing, you can hit me up via email as well, jgodett@bsu.edu. Awesome response to last week's episode with John Boog Shiambi from ESPN. If you haven't had a chance to check that one out or any of our previous episodes, you can always do that in our back catalog. Just scroll through iTunes or Stitcher and or wherever else you happen to find this podcast, and you can check out all previous episodes. Craig Ackerman from the Houston Rockets, before that Toby Rowland from Oklahoma, Jim Barber from ESPN, Grant Napier from the Sacramento Kings, Ted Emmerich from Westwood One, Dan Duva of the Vegas Golden Knights, and then Jay Billis takes us back to episode 70. You can always take a look back at All That Lies Behind. All That Lies Behind. Speaking of ahead, next week's guest will be the Chicago Cubs television announcer, Len Casper. So if you have any questions for Len Casper, you can give us a shout on social media as well, and we can get those asked. Mike Breen of the New York Knicks will be an upcoming guest on the podcast as well. So if you have any questions for Mike Breen, you can shoot those to us via social media at PXPcast, or again, at Joel Godet. Today's guest, I am almost positive, and I say this off the top of the interview, our first soccer guest that we've had on this program. It is Jake Zivin from the Portland Timbers, one of the most popular MLS franchises. We'll get to Jake in a minute, but I wanted to address something on a more personal note to start this podcast off. Big week for Ball State basketball. If you're a college basketball fan, you probably saw what happened on Tuesday night when the Cardinals pulled off what was statistically this season the third largest upset in college basketball. Ball State went on the road, took on Notre Dame in South Bend on Tuesday, and won 80-77, and it came down to the end. Tied at 77 after Matt Farrell hit a three with 22-ish seconds left. Ball State got the ball out of the net, did not call timeout, ran it down court, and with 1.7 seconds remaining, Taylor Persons drained a three from the left wing to give Ball State its first win over a ranked opponent ever on the road, true road game, and its first win over a ranked opponent at all since 2001, one of the biggest wins in program history, and most definitely the biggest win that the program has had in nearly 2 decades. I lay that as the foreground because kind of an awesome moment to broadcast and kind of an awesome moment to be a part of. And, it's one of the things that we live for in this business. And it's interesting because we've discussed so many things like that on this podcast over the course of 77 episodes. And all of it was swirling around in my head as that game wore on. Ball State has played some fairly high-level competition this year. It's got one of the stronger strength of schedules in the country. Went to Oklahoma earlier this season and got, barn doorsed. Played Oregon, 3 weeks ago, and competed, was in the game until about the under 16 in the second half, led for a nice portion of the first half, was in that game, but this game was different. And Ball State controlled it. And kind of as the game wore on, you could feel the excitement level grow, and you kind of had a sense that, not that the Cardinals were going to win it as the game wore on, But you had a sense that this was going to continue and that Ball State was going to hang around and this was going to be fun as the game went. And I distinctly remember when we got to the under 4 media timeout and Ball State was still in front, thinking to myself, coming out of timeout, these next 4 minutes, or 3.5 minutes at that point, have to be perfect. And it's funny because over the last couple of weeks, my whole mentality from a broadcast standpoint has been not to be the uber perfectionist. Just kind of let rip and let it carry wherever it goes. And it's been a nice kind of weight off my shoulders, and I think the product in a lot of ways has been better because of that. But in those last 4 minutes, I was like, must be perfect, must be perfect, must be perfect. And there were 2 plays in particular that come to mind where, for me, the call was not what I wanted it to be, because I kind of froze up in a second thinking this has to be perfect. So it's funny how that works out. But it comes down to the final call, which got a decent amount of traction and was on SportsCenter, which was like the most unbelievably cool thing ever. For some people that listen to this podcast, maybe that's been something that's happened before, or maybe some people out there that listen to this are on ESPN. I know some people that are out there that listen to this are on ESPN, so it's just kind of a regular occurrence. But when that's not your regular and that's not your everyday, it was pretty cool. And it was neat to get some feedback and some thoughts from people on how that final call played out. I think in the moment, I liked it a lot.
Tie game, 19.8. Shot clock is off. Inbound to Persons. James Whitford likes to let them play out. He will not call the timeout. 13 seconds to go. Ball State 77. 8th-ranked Notre Dame 77. 7 seconds. Moses the screen. Persons goes left. 4 seconds. Persons a 3. Got it! Persons, left wing 3, 1.7 seconds at the Joyce Center in South Bend. Farrell will inbound baseline to Colson, heaves three-quarter court, it's over, it's over. Ball State for the first time since 2001 beats a ranked opponent. It's 8th-ranked Notre Dame in South Bend on a Tuesday night in December.
As I've listened to it now incessantly since then, I kind of like it less and less, and have to kind of recheck myself and say, no, it was all right, it was good. I look at it and say, maybe it was a little too screamy. I thought maybe I didn't love the inflection of it 100%, and then I certainly wish I would have laid out faster on the back end of the final call. But then I listened to it again. I'm like, no, you know what? It was cool. It was good. So it's that interesting inner dialogue and inner monologue that we all have as broadcasters when we evaluate big moments and how we handle certain things. I've had that back and forth in my head quite significantly over the last couple of days. At the end of the day, I was happy with it, and I kind of wish I would have said "Boom goes the dynamite." No, not really. But I have had a bunch of people say, "Hey, you should have said "Boom goes the dynamite." I'm not 100% sold on how that would have gone over. But jokingly in my head, maybe I should have said "Boom goes the dynamite." Anyway, just wanted to mention that and kind of talk about the firsthand experiences of being in a big moment and handling that. Like we talk about with people on this broadcast all the time. Certainly there was a tightening of the tensions, and I thought I handled it well enough under the circumstances, but hey, it all comes with reps, and it all comes with experience, and I'm sure next time out it'll be different, and the time after that it'll be different, and the time after that it'll be different, and that's part of the fun evolution of the craft that we all do. All right, let's jump into today's guest. I mentioned, I'm almost positive, Jake Zivin is the first soccer broadcaster we've had on this podcast. And I was excited to talk to him, had a chance to meet Jake, and we had never met before. So just kind of on a whim, he agreed to do this podcast in person. When I was out in Portland, Oregon, when Ball State went out west to take on the Oregon Ducks in basketball. So sat down with Jake in a local coffee shop in Portland, of which there are many, and you'll hear that here in the podcast. The gnat sound and all, you will hear them making coffee in the background, so enjoy. But it was cool to pick his brain. And I'm not going to give away the game here, but he'll talk about his path to becoming a voice of an MLS soccer team. And as is the case with a lot of people on this podcast, it's a unique path, and it's not a replicable path, so to speak, for everybody. All of us get into this our own different ways, and Jake's story and way is, like all of the ones on this podcast so far, unique to him. So it'll be interesting, I think, for you guys to hear kind of how he went from being a television sports anchor in Montana and then in Oregon to being the television voice of a Major League Soccer franchise. But we also talk about the nuts and bolts of soccer broadcasting and storytelling in soccer, how you do it, when you do it, if you can do it. We talk about language, because soccer is such an international game, talking about British dialect versus American dialect versus just how people talk about soccer. How do you do it when you're broadcasting this to an American audience? And then we'll talk about name pronunciation, all that stuff. It's a fun one with Jake Zivin for a lot of reasons, to explore a sport that I don't have a lot of exposure to as a broadcaster and really as a fan. I haven't been around soccer as much as, honestly, I'd probably want to. So anyway, that being said, let's dive right in with Jake Zivin of the Portland Timbers, our first MLS guest here on Play-by-Playcast. All right, Jake Zivin, at the time of this recording, I do believe this to be true, but I'm not 100% positive. I believe you are the first soccer broadcaster we've had on this podcast, so congrats.
Thank you. I'm happy to represent the beautiful game on this podcast. There's, I think, a nice young generation of soccer broadcasters coming up, and I'll take the flag for them for now, at least.
Let's talk about that first off, and in terms of the growth of the sport in this country and how that's created opportunities from a broadcast standpoint, because I don't know, and I mean, MLS has been around, but if you would have said 15 years ago, I'm going to make a legit full-time living as a full-time employee of a soccer franchise in this country, I think you would have gotten some eye rolls. And nowadays, you still might, but those people are probably in the wrong and the minority.
Yeah, that's definitely correct. And I think it's even more recent than that. One thing that I am so appreciative of the Portland Timbers is that I have a full-time job with them, and it's still, I don't want to say rare, but you look at a lot of the other guys calling games for other MLS teams, and it's not their only gig. For some it is, for some it's not, and so still getting to the point where I think like that's, and being the play-by-play guy for an MLS team is a full-time gig, and for the Timbers, they were great. They've been great to me in kind of carving that out and figuring out ways to make it so that it works full-time, and certainly 15 years ago, you wouldn't have had that. You would have had just kind of in certain places, I think, kind of the local guy who didn't know anything about soccer, and you just put him on play-by-play because he's the best person in the market at doing play-by-play, but he might not really know the sport. Now I think that's changing, and you're having people tailored a little more to soccer and that came up with the sport and know the sport well, and it's great. It's a growing sport. There's still a long way to go, but yeah, it has grown leaps and bounds.
When you Google your name, I think it's like the third link that comes up is the Bleacher. I think it's Bleacher Report, or maybe it's we'll say Bleacher Report. I don't know. We'll give credit where it's due, I guess, in the postscript. The title is that you've got the best job in soccer broadcasting. Why do you? Or maybe if you disagree with that, like maybe top three. But what's great about being the voice of the Portland Timbers?
Yeah, so it's Stumptown Footy, I think, which is the local SB Nation site for...
I knew it was something in that.
Yeah, it's basically, right? It's similar. I think what the context I meant is from a local TV gig, right, of the now 22 and expanding teams in MLS. To me, you can't have a better one than the Timbers, and I said it in that article as well, that there are other teams in the same tier. Obviously a Seattle, that there are big rivals, but what they have up there soccer culture wise is great. The Canadian teams, Kansas City, now the teams in the Southeast, Atlanta, shocked everybody, I think, with what they did in their first year from a support standpoint. And that article was from before Atlanta. Everybody knew this was going to be Atlanta. Orlando is great as well, but just the passion that the city of Portland has for the Portland Timbers, the relevance of the Timbers in this market. I grew up in Chicago. The Chicago Fire are, 5th, 6th at best in the city of Chicago. In Portland, the Timbers are a a strong number 2. Some people would argue a 1A to the Blazers. It's just absolutely remarkable. You walk around the city, you see people in Timbers gear, you see Timbers flags, you see Timbers decals all over the city. You don't see that in other MLS markets. You see it in some, you don't see it in all of them. And so, yeah, for me to be able to call games for a fan base that's so passionate, Providence Park, the atmosphere every game is remarkable. It's one of the best sporting atmospheres I've been a part of, any sport, any level, and I feel lucky to be able to call games in that atmosphere. That's what I was going for with that. Yeah.
Self-aggrandizing question for you here, but like, do you? That all being said, and I mean, if it's a 1A to the Blazers type deal, do you feel like you're the voice of a major franchise? Do you walk around and do you get noticed as the voice of the Timbers walking around in Portland?
I'm not. I think I'm a pretty nondescript guy. So, and I've got my off-season beard going right now, so I can go a little incognito. I mean, obviously, you'll get recognized when you're at events associated with the team. If I'm around Providence Park, around the stadium, if I'm with my broadcast partner, we'll get a little more. But I'm 5'8.5", brown hair, brown eyes, pretty nondescript person, so I don't get recognized that much, which is fine. But to that point, I don't think like that, to be honest. And I'm not, but yeah, I mean, it is when you kind of step back and you think, man, there's a lot of people who know who I am just because I call these games. It's cool to think of it, and it's kind of a little weird, I have a couple close friends who are also in the media business, and they'll kind of be like, oh, my friend. I actually just got a text yesterday. My friend was like, are you really friends with Jake Zivin? We're huge Timbers fans. We watch Timbers in 30, which is every week. We watch Timbers in 30 every week, me and my husband. And it's kind of crazy to think of that. Like, people would, know me in that way. But it's great. It's flattering. It's an honor. And it comes with the territory. I guess it's not why I do it. But, it's nice, obviously, when you hear things like that.
I want to get into how you got here and kind of your backstory of broadcasting a little. But I want to start with the actual technical nature of what you do in soccer. I had a conversation with somebody a couple of weeks ago that was just talking about how they improve as a broadcaster in terms of words they use, phrases they use, things like that. They said they like to watch soccer because the way that game is described is different than anything else. And there's a lot of, I think, accuracy to that. There's a lot of phrases, words that get described in soccer. It's got its own grammar. In our office, we always kind of joke, our soccer coach at Ball State is English, and it's always, Ball State are victorious, and we just kind of joke about it. But what's different and unique to the way people talk soccer that is special to broadcasting and that other people can kind of admire?
Yeah, to be honest, I think that's one of the toughest things about being a soccer play-by-play broadcaster is navigating the grammar of soccer and the grammar of American sports and how you combine that. We're not calling games in Britain. I'm not calling games for a British audience. I'm calling games for an American audience. So, and I've heard other people, John Strong, who's kind of the voice of American soccer, who's a predecessor of mine with the Timbers and a friend of mine who I've talked to a lot about kind of our craft, and I've heard him talk about it. Words like table, which is what in Britain they would call standings. In America, you would call them standings. So what do you use? How often do you use table? How often do you use standings? Do you interchange them? I think I tend to interchange those. Something like fixture, which is what they would call a game, a match, kind of like the schedule in England. I would probably never really use that here, and I never really use that in my own vernacular as well. So I think it's important to kind of find a balance of authenticity to who you are as a person. I'm American, right? I grew up watching American soccer, watching the U.S. national team, watching the Chicago Fire in Chicago, watching MLS in general, but also the Bears, the Cubs, the Bulls, the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, college football, college basketball. So being authentic to me and who I am, the words I would use, striking that balance. You don't want to be super an Anglophile because it comes off inauthentic, I think, and it's tough. It's tough to strike that balance. So it's something that I am still, I think, evolving with and trying to figure out, how to use certain phrases and when to use certain phrases. And I'll listen back to myself and be like, yeah, that I shouldn't have used that. It didn't work there. It would work if I were on the BBC calling Manchester United Chelsea. It doesn't work here in America with my voice and who I am. And I think that's a tricky thing as a play-by-play guy for soccer is to kind of figure out how to navigate. And it's not just British English. It's this every country in the world plays this sport, and there's obviously a style of calling it that's more associated with Latin America and Latin American soccer, the goal, and there's been people who've tried that in English, and I don't think it really works with the way in American English, I should say. And so, but I think there are things you can take from the way the game is called in Spanish language, in Latin America, to the way we call it with American English in the U.S. A little maybe more the energy that you don't see in Britain. And I think it's, American soccer, just like America as a country, is a melting pot of different cultures, and I think you'll see that in the way American broadcasters call the game.
Do you take stuff from watching? If we talk about Latin American broadcasts, if you're a basketball guy, you don't really have that kind of luxury, or certainly a football guy, FOOT football. You don't really have that luxury. Will you watch an Ian Dark or an Arlo or Latin American soccer, and how much will you sit there and say, okay, well, let me try this and see how kind of that tinkering can work? Yeah,
absolutely. I think you take it from and every sport. I'll go beyond people in soccer. When I watch any sport, I think about it and how they call the game. With British soccer, especially, the way I call games, I think I have a little more energy, a little more of American style, because that's how I came up. That's what I enjoyed growing up watching. Again, the Bulls, the Bears. I enjoyed that kind of the energy, the excitement of the call, and so I think I call a game a little more like that. Whereas you'll watch some games from kind of overseas, British side, British English especially, it's a little more subdued, and it's almost kind of, I'm unimpressed with that, and that's just the style of some guys. I don't think Arlo White and Ian Dark are that way, and I love the way they call games, and they certainly bring an energy. What I loved about watching specifically, Liga MX on, say, Univision or Telemundo or Galavision when I was young in Chicago is I could be on the other side of the room not paying attention, and I would know when I need to pay attention, because the cadence picks up, the excitement picks up, the tone picks up when the ball's getting into a dangerous spot. Not just after the goal's been scored, but in the build-up to it. So you know that I know when to pay attention, I know when to look over, and I love that, and I think that's what I've taken most from the Latin American style, or at least I should say the Spanish language in America coverage of Liga MX and national team games that I watched as a kid growing up and continue to watch now, is that way of calling a game. It's a balance, and I think you always try to learn from other announcers in any sport, because especially for me, I'm still very, very new to this, so plenty for me to pick up along the way.
Random question, and I just thought of it because of the way you said Univision. Is that something you have to be aware of as well in soccer, especially with such an international influence? Is the way you, do you Americanize names and words and things like that, or do you almost have to be respectful to true pronunciations of where people are from, and how difficult can that be? Because I imagine there are some tricky ones.
Oh, it's hard. It's so hard. We have a player from Lithuania who goes by Vytas, Vytas, but his full name is Vytautas Andriuškevičius, and when he came, he signed with the team last year. That was his name that was written out, and we asked him, how do you say your name? And he's like, well, first of all, just call me Vytas. And it's like, all right, we will, but we want to know, how do you say your name? It's like, well, so in Lithuania we say Vytautas Andriuškevičius, but in other parts of Europe we say, they say Vytautas Andriuškevičius. And it's like, all right, well, which do you say? And he's like, oh, I don't care. It's like, no, what do you say? We want to know, we want to get it right. And it's hard because there are so many. I would have never said a Lithuanian name. And maybe if the Blazers, right, or Vytas Sabonis. So in Portland a little bit, they know about Lithuanian athletes, but I would have never said anything Lithuanian ever before in my life. And I'm not, it's difficult. That is difficult. But I think it's important to get it right and to be accurate. I think one of the most important things as a play-by-play person is your accuracy in every way, and that includes pronunciation. So, I don't think I'm necessarily great at it, but I try to drill in before a game, tricky pronunciations. I try to make sure I get them right.
And work on your accents?
Yeah, well, I can't do accents, that's for sure. So I can't roll my R. That's the toughest part, right? I can't roll my R.
That's a bad hit in soccer.
Yeah, right, exactly. You have to do it. You have to do it frequently. So I'll Americanize those, I guess, when there's supposed to be a rolled R.
People always say that baseball is the storyteller's medium because of how slow the sport can be, and you've got a lot of time. Yeah. And maybe correct me if I'm wrong on this with soccer. The the uninformed opinion when people that don't know the game look at it and they go, well, nothing happens. And obviously there's a lot going on in between goals.
Yeah.
But to a certain extent as well, when there's just action in the middle of the field, how much does that open it up to you to kind of have a creative palette and be able to do some storytelling?
See, I would say soccer is the exact opposite of baseball. I think it's a sport where there's the least amount of ability to tell stories because the ball's always in play. Again, a non-soccer person would say, what about when they're down on the ground flopping? But for the most
that's why I was curious.
Right, exactly. But then there's an injury, so you got to talk about the injury, right? So if you start telling a story and a guy's down in pain, you don't know if he's actually hurt or not, right? So you got to
talk about how great a piano player he is.
Right, exactly. Yes, there's goals are rare, but scoring chances aren't necessarily rare. And if you're telling a story about a guy and all of a sudden the ball gets into the final third and there's a dangerous cross into the box, you've got to describe this cross. The ball's going into the box, and if you're a viewer watching, you're like, hey, come on, I'm a fan of this team. I think they might score here. And you're telling a story about, what Joe did in college, and, and it's just, you've got to give, I think, you've got to say what's happening, to be honest, in that moment. So I think it's the most difficult to get in stories. Every other major sport, you have stoppages. Baseball, of course, right? I mean, that's as you said, everybody knows. That's the number one example. You have to have a billion stories in your mind to be able to call that game. Basketball, there are stoppages. There's fouls, there's free throws, ball goes out of bounds.
It almost sounds like you're more hockey approach in terms of...
Yeah, probably. I've never called a hockey game. I'm not a big hockey guy, so I haven't thought too much about it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of action going on in soccer. And it's not The Simpsons where they're just passing the ball back and forth in the midfield. You'll get games that are less entertaining like that, right? Where one team's trying to sit back, the other team is just happy having the ball and doesn't have a ton of ambition in a game. But even then, the ball's still going to get into the final third, every 30 seconds or so. And so it can be tough to get in stories, and you've got to kind of pick your moments and be ready to bail. I mean, that's a big thing. You've got to bail. I mean, I think I've bailed in the middle of stories. I think you probably bail in the middle of stories in soccer way more often than you would in any other sport.
This will be, I'm sure, different than probably the wonkiest question I ask you, but different from radio to television as well, because certainly radio, you have zero time because you're always describing passes. But in television as well, where's your balance in terms of everybody always, whenever you first start doing television, they always say stop talking, lay out a little bit more. But on the same note, and maybe this goes back to the hockey thing, like Doc Emmerich is famous for describing everything, even on television. Is that kind of the approach you take with soccer too?
No, yeah, I think the former, where you don't need to say as much on TV, especially in Portland. We have an incredible atmosphere. So when the Timbers Army is rocking and they're singing, if it's a rainy night, which we'll often get,
you don't say.
Yeah, exactly, right. It rains a couple days a year here in Portland. And the team's just knocking the ball around the middle. You can lay out and let the viewers into this atmosphere. Providence Park, we have one of, if not, biased obviously, but the best atmosphere in American soccer. And one of the best atmospheres, I think, in American sports. I don't think that's hyperbole. I think going to a Portland Timbers game is an incredible experience, a live audience experience. And other sports have come to the Timbers and other teams in MLS to ask them, how do you do this? How do you make it so that people want to come to your game? Because watching games on TV now is a great experience. And so you're seeing dwindling attendance elsewhere in other big sports around the country, and other sports want to know, how do you replicate this in ML? How do we replicate what you guys have? And there's not an easy answer, but anyway, because of that atmosphere, I think we want to let people in a little more on TV. It's something that I still trying to figure out. Still relatively new to TV. Just finished my second full year on TV, so still trying to catch that balance of when to lay out, how much to talk, when to talk, at what points. I switch between TV and radio because when the Timbers are on national TV, which happens 14 times a year, at least 15 times a year, we're a big draw nationally, so we get pretty much the max picked up that the national national networks can pick up. I'll call the game on radio. So you're switching back and forth throughout the season. That can be tricky. You get in a rhythm of calling every touch on the radio, and then have to go back to TV where it's, once it gets into a dangerous spot, that's when you really want to get into calling every touch, but you don't necessarily need to in other places. So yeah, it is a balance that I'm still definitely trying to figure out.
How much TV play-by-play had you done before you started doing the Timbers on TV, and what was that like? Oh, crap factor like the first time you did it?
Yeah, not a lot. So before I was with the Timbers, I was a sports director at the ABC station in Eugene. We did a high school football and basketball game of the week that was an incredibly bare bones production. There were 2 cameras, there were no replays, switching back and forth in our control room. So literally we had one camera attached to our microwave van, the other camera attached to a stinger. Those are obviously industry terms, but so you're basically sending 2 live shots back simultaneously to our control room, and then they're switching between the 2 as we're calling the game from a high school gym or a high school football field. I tried to prep in the same way that I would if I was doing it for ESPN. But it was a rudimentary production. So that was the only TV I'd really done, TV play-by-play. Then I did a season of, we have a USL team, which is basically the equivalent of a minor league affiliate here called Portland Timbers 2, kind of a reserve team, a developmental team, and I called their games on Webstream for a season, the 2015 season. So that gave me mechanics of calling a game visually when the people watching can see what's happening versus radio, which I had done for 2 seasons for the Timbers before getting my first shot at TV. The first game I did was against Real Salt Lake, end of the 2015 season in Salt Lake City. Was fortunate that the Timbers gave me a chance to see what I could do. Ended up being the last 3 games of that season. I was definitely nervous heading in. I had been on TV thousands of times over the past 8 years as mostly a sports anchor, sports reporter, but I had never done a real TV play-by-play broadcast. We're on Root Sports, a legitimate regional sports network, obviously. All that goes into it, coming in and out of breaks, sponsorship reads, billboards, all that stuff I'd never done before. So I was nervous about it. Once it got into the game and got into calling of the game, I settled down. I remember being pretty nervous for the open, and we got through it one take, which was awesome.
It's crazy because that's the thing I feel like you would be most comfortable doing.
Well, so it ended up when we started doing, I was like, okay, I can do this, right? And my co-commentator Ross Smith, great friend of mine now, we did it in one take, and he turns, he's like, wow. It was great one take, and I was like, man, that's the easy part, because this is what I've done for 8 years, right? Everything's planned out. You know what you're going to say. You can, not scripted out. There's not a teleprompter like there is when you're anchoring, but you know what you're going to say. It's all planned beforehand. Everything else that's coming, this is what I've never really done before. But once the game got going, and once, you get the rhythm of the game, and I fell a little more comfortable, and definitely treaded lightly that first game, which I think didn't try to do too much, which I think really worked out well. And from then on, I've been fortunate enough to be able to keep doing it. But I remember the nerves that night were strong.
Let me go back to the beginning of getting involved with the Timbers, because you obviously are doing TV. You're in Montana. You come to KZI in Eugene, Oregon, about 2 hours south of where we are now. You love soccer. You want to get involved in soccer. You want to be a soccer broadcaster. What happened in your mind in terms of plotting out, like, all right, I'm close to a team, although not too close, but like relatively close, that I'll make it work, and saying, like, how did the process go of reaching out and seeing if they would be interested in having this TV guy from sort of nearby get involved? Yeah,
so I will say this, my path was not the right way to do it, because I didn't do what you just described, and I should have earlier. So I'll start back in college when I was at Carleton College. Math major, yeah. No, we didn't have a journalism program at all. So I was at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. In between my sophomore and junior year, I interned with Major League Soccer, the broadcast department in the league office in New York City. Made some great contacts, obviously, in that point. Guys who are still really, and people who are still really involved in U.S. soccer and MLS. From that internship, I was able to get a job on the ESPN Game of the Week, in the production side of it, operating the bug. I was the clock and score operator, so I'm operating the scoreboard. I'm flying. It was a traveled position, so I would take class Monday through Friday. I only had morning classes on Friday. I would drive up to MSP, Minneapolis St. Paul Airport, and fly to wherever the game is on Friday afternoon, do the game on Saturday or Sunday if it was a Sunday game, fly back in time for class on Monday.
That's a great deal.
It was awesome. I'm a junior and senior year, and I'm on the road with. So at the time, it was Rob Stone was the play-by-play guy. Eric Ronaldo was color. Brandy Chastain was the sideline reporter. Eric Ronaldo, Brandy Chastain, people who I grew up watching play. Rob Stone, who's obviously with Fox Sports right now, and at the time at ESPN, has had an incredibly successful career. And I'm on the road with these guys as a 20-year-old, 21-year-old, going out to dinner Friday nights, Saturday nights with the crew. The crew embraced me. The production side of it, more so. I was closer, obviously, with the people on the production side, the people in the truck as well. And so I was able to do that for 2 seasons, last 2 years in college, and created those great connections. Stayed in touch with a lot of the people who are still involved in soccer. Guys like Todd Koulis, Shaw Brown. These are behind the scenes people that soccer people will know. Russ Lathrop, Larry Ciscornia with Major League Soccer. Jason Sagini, who's Major League Soccer. I'm sure some other names that I'm forgetting and leaving out, but they were great with me and staying in touch with me over, my kind of foray into local sports news anchoring. When I took the job in Eugene out of Montana, I said to myself, I knew the Timbers were coming into MLS, and I thought to myself, yeah, it was part of one of the reasons of going. Obviously, Eugene's a great sports market. Coming from Missoula, Montana, it's a step up from covering a great FCS program and high school sports in Missoula to covering the University of Oregon, Oregon State, 2 big Pac-12 schools. So that was the big part of it. But in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, there's an MLS team coming into the league just up the road. Maybe I could get involved. My first year in Eugene, we shared a lot of video with the affiliates up in Portland, and the sports director at KPTV, the Fox station, is a guy named Matt Smith. Was a guy named Matt Smith at the time. So I knew Matt from. We shared, video back and forth together. Matt Smith became the first director of broadcasting of the Portland Timbers when the team came into the league in 2011. So I overlapped with Matt in the local news world for 6 months, maybe less, enough to know each other. He goes, and he's not my boss, I'll say, with the Timbers right now, but so he's with the Timbers, and I should have at that point been like, hey Matt, just so you know, I'm a huge soccer guy. Worked with the league. Soccer's always my favorite sport. I've always wanted to get back into it full time if possible, and I didn't do that. And I should have. So that's don't necessarily emulate me if you're listening to this. 2013, I'm calling a local high school game for KEZI. I remember this well. It was at Marist High. I forget who they were playing. Or maybe it was at Springfield High. And I get an email from Matt Smith, and it's like, hey, I'm sitting in the truck. The Timbers were in the Western Conference Finals at the time against Real Salt Lake. I'm sitting in the truck with Larry Ciscornia. He tells me, you're a big soccer guy. Well, let's talk. So Larry Ciscornia, now VP of Broadcasting at Major League Soccer. Matt Smith, now the VP of Broadcasting with the Portland Timbers. Larry was my boss when I was an intern. And Larry must have said, hey, I kept in touch with Larry. I said, hey, do you know Jake Zivin down in Eugene? He's a big soccer guy. And Matt reached out immediately, and I was like, "Oh, that's awesome. I should have reached out to him." And anyway, that off season, I came up to Portland. We met. We chatted for a while, and that turned into them offering me the radio gig for the 2014 season while I was still at KEZI. KEZI was super supportive of it. I was fortunate. I would drive up to do games, 34 games, a year. Wasn't even that many, because when it was on national TV, I didn't do the radio game. And was able to call radio games for a year. The Timbers put together a package that would get me up full time for the 2015 season, and I'm still here now. So if I had gotten in touch with Matt, 2011, maybe it would have all happened sooner. I recommend networking better than I did, and not being afraid, I guess, to reach out to people. I think that was kind of my thing. It's not that I didn't think about it. It was more just like, why would he care? I don't want to bother him. Why does he care if I'm, but it's not as I think most people would know. Most people, especially in the position that Matt's in, no, they want to know what the options are, and they're always happy to talk and to help people out. And I wish I kind of had the confidence back in 2011 to do that. I didn't. It worked out for me in the end, but could have happened sooner. I
have the same conversations in my head all the time, so I'm in the same spot as you. I agree with you wholeheartedly on all of everything you just said there. The conversation you had with KEZI about, because I don't know how much work you had to miss to do 30-some-odd games. Yeah. How did that go? And did you imagine, what did you think going into that? Are you thinking, this is this is not going to go well and I'm going to be bummed because I'm going to miss this opportunity, or were you pretty sure it was going to work out?
No, I'll say I was fortunate. They always treated me great at KZI. I was fortunate that my contract was up that I don't know the exact date, but it would have been up like in the same off season that this happened. Okay. So, or maybe it would have been up before. Down in KZI, basically like the cycles are football seasons, right? You don't want somebody to leave in the middle of a football season. You don't want to have to replace somebody super close to a football season. So it's like, get me through in the next football season. So the contract would have been up before the next football season. So I basically went to them and I was like, look, I have this offer. I really want to do it. I love soccer. I'd been there for almost 4 years at the time, sports director for at least 2 of those years. Thought I had a really good relationship with everybody and worked hard. So I went to my boss at the time, a guy named Mark Hatfield, and I said, look, I have this offer and I really, really want to do it. I'd be happy to re-sign, to extend with you guys through the next football season, which would take me through the end of the 2014 soccer season as well, if you guys let me do it. If it's in there that, I can call these games. And I ended up missing a handful of Saturdays during the college football season, which is obviously, that's prime time. That's what matters most. And they were supportive of me doing it. I appreciated that. I still appreciate that so much, that I was able to do both that season. And, there really wasn't much of a conversation. It was, no problem. I think for them, benefit was having continuity through another football season. That football season ended up being Marcus Mariota's Heisman Trophy year, when the Ducks lost to Ohio State in the national championship game. So that was, one of the most prominent football seasons in Oregon history. So obviously it's good for them to have somebody, have the continuity of leadership there during the sports department during that season. So mutually beneficial for everybody, and it worked out really well.
So the lesson in there is just have a really good boss.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've been fortunate, I've been fortunate at KZI and now with the Timbers as well. I started in Missoula, Montana as well. I've been fortunate, I think, to work at good places. I have nothing but good things to say about all the places I've been, and I know in this world, in this business, it's not always the case with everybody. So I definitely feel lucky.
You talked about Matt being your boss, broadcast director, and that's, I don't deal with that where I'm at, and I'm sure a lot of people do, some people don't. But what's the evaluation process like for you? You said you listen to all your stuff all the time, but what kind of feedback do you get in terms of what people want to hear from you, or hey, this is great, this isn't? How's that all work?
It's incredible. It's the first time in my career that I've really had, some constant kind of feedback and coaching. Matt is super good at we meet every week, and great at giving me feedback and coaching, and it's been illuminating. There's plenty of times when he'll bring up certain aspects that I didn't necessarily notice about the way I said something, or repeating phrases and the such, and even deeper. It started kind of play-by-play 101 because I hadn't really done much TV, so I'm just worried about hitting the big moments well, getting the goal calls right, laying out at the right times, navigating through a broadcast at a basic level, making sure that all everything goes smooth, not trying to do too much, and it's evolved to being a little more nuanced and talking about kind of what I want my on-air persona to be, being authentic, that sort of kind of higher level maybe nuances of calling a game and doing play-by-play. And again, I've been so grateful and thankful to have somebody, and certainly it goes beyond Matt. Our guys at Root Sports, our TV partner, are awesome at feedback as well. But with Matt, it's on a more kind of week-to-week basis and day-to-day basis as well. But it's been super helpful, and I think that I would always tell anybody to listen to advice and listen to other people and get as much coaching as you can. And you might think what you're doing well and what you're not doing well, but you might not. And so it's always good to get that coaching if you can. Not everybody's going to be in a spot where they can get it. I think it's really helped me grow quicker than maybe I would have if I were just trying to figure it out on my own, which in like the sports TV anchoring world, that's what it was for the most part. I had a couple sports directors that really helped early, but both my jobs I kind of became the sports director pretty quick, so that was 6 to 9 months each time. So to have kind of an extended mentor teaching coaching relationship has been wonderful.
Jake, I'll let you go on this note. How many times do you tell somebody what you do for a living and they say, hey, can I hear a goal call?
It's never happened. Oh man, no, thankfully.
Really?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't. I don't know. I would
lucky you, because I get touchdown all the time, and I'm like, I can't do that for you.
Yeah, no, I would refer him to YouTube, I think. Yeah, no, man. Some people will be like, do you go goal? I'm like, no, I don't do that. That wouldn't work. But yeah, no, thankfully, that's not a frequent occurrence.
How do people find you if they want to follow the Timbers, if they want to follow you on social media, whatnot?
Yeah, at Jake Zivin on Twitter, JakeZivin. Timbers.com for everything Timbers related, and yeah, watch the 2018 season. Should be interesting and fun.
Jake, this was fun. I appreciate you coming down here and meeting me on a whim and knocking this one out.
Oh, it's great. I appreciate it as well, Joel. Great to meet you and great to talk.
All right, you heard it there. Major League Soccer broadcaster Jake Zivin does not get asked a lot for people to give his goal call. Nobody walks up to him and goes, hey, can I hear a goal? Which really did dumbfound me. Like, I kind of surprised. I'm disappointed in you, soccer fans. I get touchdown or home run all the time. I kind of envy it, actually, that nobody's asked him for a goal call. And I thought it was interesting, and this goes back to the kind of dialect stuff that we talked about more toward the beginning of the podcast, that he doesn't go with the elongated goal. That's not who he is, and that's not how a lot of sports sound like in America. It's that the type of audience that you're broadcasting to. It doesn't necessarily work in English the same way it works internationally or in Spanish or things of that nature. A lot of interesting things just about soccer and soccer broadcasting that I've never really considered because it's really one sport I've not had a lot of exposure to professionally. So that was fun for me to kind of pick Jake's brain and broaden my horizons a little bit into a new sport. Hopefully for those of you who don't have a ton of soccer exposure, it did the same. And for those of you guys that are big soccer fans out there, it gave you a taste and a flavor of something we haven't had on the pod that you can relate to a lot and probably have been waiting for a little while as well. So my sincere thanks to Jake Zivin for joining us here on this podcast and for doing it on a whim in person and just meeting this random guy who was coming out west who hosts a podcast at a coffee shop to record it. So it continues. My favorite thing about this podcast is the openness of people to come on it. That continues to be one of the things I'm absolutely thankful for, both you guys as an audience, but also the people that come on this pod. So for that reason, many thanks to Jake Zivin. Again, next week, Len Casper. Any questions for him, hit us up at PXPcast or at Joel Godet on Twitter. Until then, we say so long. This is Play-by-Playcast, and we are out.